You'll just keep, so we'll go ahead and kick this off because we promised one of our commitments is to start on time and end on time. We do our best to actually make that happen. So welcome everyone for joining us today. This is our, I think, 7th or 8th event for our lunch series. And this one we're focusing again on allyship, with the title being the importance and impact and inspiration of allyship in the workplace. So we at SIM, I don't know if you're familiar, we don't have our normal introduction happening here, but SIM basically is an organization that focuses on IT, developing the next layer of talent for IT leadership. And we are an extension of that program. So we're excited today to basically introduce you to SIM if you haven't heard of them, as well as the extension program of SIM for Women. So we're a lunch series designed for women by women, which is why you have this at the middle of the day. We are trying to create a safe community for discussion on topics related to diversity and inclusion, and really focusing in on the how part of the conversation. So there's a lot of discussions around kind of the why and what's, and we really try and focus on the how to give people both inspiration and ideas around enablement. So our format is intentionally designed to be informal and interactive, so please ask questions. You can either use the chat, or we will have program breaks and pauses to include at the end for questions for our panelists. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and transition. I'm excited and honored to introduce our 2 panelists today. Our first panelist joins us here locally from Portland, Oregon, Elise Rosenberg. She's the Deputy Chief Technology Officer and the Deputy Director for the Bureau of Technology Services for the City of Portland. She has spent 25 years in service for the local government and has worked through a variety of areas to include strategy, financial, and policy roles in the areas of technology, finance, environmental protection, aviation. She is married with 2 rescue dogs and has a musical bent with both fiddling and singing. And we learned on one of our prep calls that both Wendy and she share a musical bent. Our second panelist today is Wendy Lindsay. She is a senior enterprise sales engineer with Okta. Most of you probably have heard of Okta. It's really around identity management. And she's joining us from the state of Utah. So welcome, Wendy. She comes from a farming background, originally from Montana, moved into technology in college, and I hope that she's going to share with you how she chose her field of study, which was computer science. I thought it was very practical and shows how practical she is in her decision making. She spent 18 years as a software developer prior to moving into the sales side of the house as a solutions engineer. And she was recently nominated and awarded the Founders Award at Okta, which is given to, if I read it right, less than 10 people company-wide, so it's quite an honor. She's married to a fellow nerd and parent to 7 children, which I think is unbelievable, and also has music talent around vocals and other areas. So on that note, we're going to go ahead and move into, move into the agenda to give you a sense. So we're going to cover several topics today, really the impact that allyship has had on their careers. You know, how do you find, create, and nurture allies in your workplace? People have different levels of influence, and we really want to touch on how do you get this enabled into your culture. Developing allyship as part of your team culture, and then really where can someone start? And we'll also save some time for Q&A. As always, we're focused on outcomes, so we're hoping that you will take away one thing from this call. So at that point, I think you go ahead, Alexa, and if you want to pull. Oh, thank you. I almost forgot. Quickly before we move on, we did want to level set with the definition of allyship. Allyship, from our perspective, is an inclusive behavior that aims to promote representation with our teams, celebrate diversity, and increase inclusion within the workplace. So this is a newer concept to some folks. It's a concept that has been around for a while. You'll hear it basically lead into terms like advocacy and mentorship. But today we're really going to focus in the area of allyship as each of these women take the perspective and the impact it's had on their careers. So ladies, how about we start? Elise, would you like to start us off with, I'll start with our first question. Can you please share with us what allyship means to you?
Well, sure. Thanks, Sasha. Thanks, Wendy, for having me. So nice to see you all here today, especially on a sunny day. I also want to say thank you to a cohort of folks who helped me think through this topic and were generous in kind of sharing their experience. And so I think allyship for me is it starts with recognizing where you might have blinders and trying to take those off in terms of the way that you move through the world and others move through the world differently. It's somebody who listens and recognizes those differences in experience and the differences in space that folks feel like they can or are able to take up, but does that in a way that doesn't speak for or speak over. So you're coming alongside or you're coming behind. You're not coming in front of or on behalf of. And I think that's a bit of a dance to try to do effectively. I'll admit, like you talked about, Sasha, having a little bit of blurriness sometimes in those lines between ally or mentor or sponsor or advocate. And so I'll do my best, but I think it's really that kind of trusted partner that sees something and kind of follows up with the person who might need allyship, but in a way that is authentic for that person who might be in need, not necessarily for what I think I should do in my role as an ally.
That's great. Thank you, Lise. How about Wendy? What's your take on allyship and what does that mean to you?
Well, to me, it really means just someone who is open-minded, being able to have someone look at you or at others and basically apply the golden rule, right? How would you like to be treated? Treat others the same way. And so as I go about my career, I run into a lot of different folks. Sasha mentioned I came from a farming background. So my dad was a farmer, one of those very stoic people that sits back and, watches other people and tends to create a classification maybe, or a judgment of those people as he's sitting back and watching. And in some ways, I mean, that could be a good thing. Just being able to understand your surroundings and the people that you're dealing with. But in a lot of other ways, classifying people into a certain bucket is very detrimental to the workplace. And so what I do, I kind of take the example of my dad and I do sit back and I watch people. How do they treat others? How do they represent others is very positive, right? So if I'm looking for someone who can help me or help others, it really is someone that has the ability to truly value someone for their opinions, for their skills, rather than for, their sex, affiliations, race, whatever that is, that absolutely should not be part of the workplace at all. And one of my soapboxes actually, and it might be kind of a weird thing to bring up on a call that's dedicated to women, but I've noticed that a lot of times my current company will send out like a survey and say, hey, we want your opinion on X, Y, and Z. And then inevitably, there is a question on that survey that says, are you male or female? Are you Black or white? And questions like that, I really almost take offense to, because I don't think you being male or female or Black or white has anything to do with how you can contribute to the bottom line of a company. And so allies to me really are the people that have no judgment, that are only interested in merit. What can you do? What skills do you provide? And how can I help you to put a spotlight on those skills so that you can really contribute to, your company or organization, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Great, Wendy. And one of the ways I heard someone define allyship, right, was basically hiring people on their potential versus necessarily their past, which I thought was kind of interesting. I have seen that in corporate, and I think it's a little bit about what you're talking about there. So Wendy, would you mind maybe sharing how allyship has impacted, your career in some way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't have any like huge wow story about this one person that just impacted my career in an amazing way. It's just many little things over the course of, I've been in the business now for over 25 years. It's just those little ways of having like a boss or maybe a peer who, rather than taking the spotlight themselves and saying, this is what I think, this is how I would do it, actually invite you to express your opinion. And luckily for me, that has happened so many times. It's actually been very rare that I've been in a situation where I felt like my talents were squelched due to the fact that I was female, for instance. But the way I look at it, obviously there are stereotypes out there. People do still have built into them sort of a women aren't good at math and science sort of mentality. And I honestly, I can admit I have the same biases in myself. But how I like to look at it, I like to look at that as an opportunity where, as being the technical person, I walk into a conference room with myself and the salesperson that I support, right? And more times than not, the salesperson that I support is a male and I'm a female. And we walk into a conference room and automatically it's, all the folks looking at me assume I'm the salesperson and the man is the technical person, right? And so I don't get offended by that. I take that as an opportunity where I can actually use that to my advantage. I can just use that as kind of a surprise, like, hey, no, I'm actually the technical person. And then I have the ability to kind of have everybody's eyes on me. And then they're hoping and really wanting me to succeed. Most people do. And you have the ability then to just kind of wow them, right? And then they're like, okay, women can do that. So, yeah, I'm kind of rambling on about a whole bunch of different things, but Elise, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. It's a fun place to be able to kind of turn those stereotypes on their heads. My mom was involved with the American Association of University Women, which was started as a group to actually advocate for girls in STEM. We didn't call it STEM at the time. But she has 2 girls and I came through finance into tech. My sister is a physician, so it worked. And maybe that's a first act of allyship, is sort of modeling that. No, that's important. You should have a voice in whatever career or whatever path. I do have a couple of stories. The first one is a little over a decade ago, working in a local government in Florida during the housing bubble, which was hugely impactful to revenue on the negative side and service need on the uptick side. And as a result of this huge drop in revenue, there were reorganizations happening, as they often do, that cut out middle management positions, and mine was one of them that was on the chopping block, unbeknownst to me. But a couple of years prior, when I took the role, it was a finance role in kind of at a department level. My bosses recognized that maybe I had a little bit of game outside of just the finance lane and made space for me at tables around strategic planning or organizational development. And that brought me into the line of sight of executive leadership. And so the impact of that 2 years later was that I got told my job was being cut. And in the same conversation, I got offered an alternative that basically said, we need to cut this role because we're running out of money. But we also recognize that you have other talents and we would like to keep you in the organization. And here's a different opportunity. And I think that that is because I was able to be seen outside of my sort of finance lane in this one little building block of the organization. And that space was made for me by my bosses at the time. And I think that probably, again, crosses those many lines between allyship and sponsorship and others. But I think that was a huge factor in keeping a job. I think a more maybe classically allyship example is also in the space of meeting with vendors. So my boss, the chief technology officer for the city, Jeff, is a white male. I have the deputy title. We fairly frequently meet with vendors who either have a relationship with us or are seeking one. And it's not abnormal for me to get ignored or talked over. It's also not abnormal still for me to be the only woman, or maybe there's one woman on the vendor side who maybe is being put in the role of taking notes or scheduling the follow-up. And Jeff is really good about, recognizing when I come off mute, take the audible intake of breath, and then get talked over. He's good at saying, I'm going to stop you there, Bob, and I want to hear what Elise has to say. And then we have follow-up conversations about, how did that feel to you, Elise? Was that okay? And did that, this is what I saw, is that what you saw? And frankly, do we want to continue our relationship with them? Because if this is how it's showing up at the senior leader level, how is it going to show up at the operation or technical or line level when we have really talented women? And maybe that's culture, maybe that's just the way, maybe it's because I have the D, deputy, in front of my name. But it's happened a few times, even locally and even lately. So I think Jeff's action is meaningful to me in that it just creates that space and that expectation with the vendor that there are equal voices at this table.
So Elise, do you feel like it has to be the highest title at the table, or how else might that show up for people when you talk about creating space? Because it's a very common way that people can become an ally.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's organizational power, and then there is sort of informal power in an organization, right? So I have another early story of my first job out of college was in a police department, young girl, non-sworn, kind of all of the things not necessarily going in my favor. And I had a role that I was writing grants that needed approval from a chief, but there were 3 or 4 layers in between. And my stuff was getting changed enough when it got to the chief's level that he'd send it back down and it would do a 360, rewrite what you started with before the sergeant and then the lieutenant and then the commander changed it. I asked the executive assistant for the chief, what's your advice here? How do I do this without violating the chain of command? And her advice was the chief's favorite candy is M&Ms. And he might visit your desk if you had some out there. And so the greatest ally in that situation was the executive assistant kind of giving me an in about, here's a way to get an ear. He'll pass by, bounce an idea off him while he's grabbing some M&Ms. Informal, get seen. I think admin, executive assistant, those operations staff, they actually run the place. They can be fantastic allies.
Those small things. I used to have be known for a huge M&M jar also on my desk, and it was amazing how many people came in.
Yeah, we have to rethink.
Being on the sales side was great because that included the finance people who had to approve deals.
Yes. M&Ms are a powerful motivator.
They are a powerful
prepackage
motivator.
them, I guess, now.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about this. Wendy, did you have anything to add maybe in regards to how you've identified allies in the past? I know you said that there was a lot of space made for you and you didn't necessarily have to look for that, but was there anything that you ever saw or identified or tried to nurture?
In finding an ally, you mean?
In finding an ally, yeah.
Yeah. Not necessarily, like I don't necessarily have any pattern, but it's more about, gosh, I'm struggling not to say anything that could be taken as offensive to anyone. As you guys know, I mean, that's a nightmare these days. Everything you say is almost in trouble of being taken the wrong way. But
I'm sure everyone on this call will assume positive intent because that's the type of people that we try and draw.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, Sasha, because that's one of the things that I have based my career on. Going into a room, assuming positive intent, assuming that everyone around that table is not a racist, is not a sexist. And in my experience, it's really hard to prove to me that you are a racist or a sexist. Because multiple layers of me are assuming that just because you phrase something a certain way, you're not trying to be offensive. And so I think that is very much a key in being able to be open to allyship without identifying someone as being sexist or racist. Take people at face value. Like I've had, here's an experience that I'm sure a lot of you will love. So when I first joined my current company, I'd been at the company maybe 6 months, and we have this huge user conference that we do every year where there's just, tens of thousands of attendees. And I really didn't know my product very well yet, didn't really know what I was doing, although I've been in the industry forever. I am an industry expert, but not necessarily on the product that I was selling at the time. And so I got a call from one of the coordinators of this company-wide event that's external facing. And he said, we'd really love to invite you to be a speaker at this event. And I thought, gosh, I've only been here for 6 months. I'm not an expert at anything yet. So I was really surprised. And at that point, he took the opportunity to tell me that the reason why he was calling on me is because they had a goal to have 50% of the technical speakers be women. And so instantly, I was all like thinking, oh, what an honor. People must really be seeing that I'm a great presenter and they want to pull me in because I'm talented. Well, unfortunately, they pulled me in just because I was female. So that ended up being kind of a downer to me. But, I embraced that opportunity and I went out and did my best. And, if you were to stop at that point and just be mad, like, hey, they only invited me because I'm a woman, then you really are kind of missing the point. And so what I tried to do was remain positive about that, take advantage of the opportunity and show them that, yes, I am a good presenter. Yes, I do have skills beyond being a woman. And then subsequently, I've been asked to come back and present every year since, even though they didn't still have that, 50% women sort of a goal each year. So.
That's great. Elise, how about you? Do you have any comments related to identification, nurturing or development of allyship?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, Wendy, it's never easy to feel like, you're there for some checking a box as opposed to being there for another reason. I think there's a dance though to recognizing that, different lived experience leads to different perspectives, leads to different answers. And so there's a dance between, I think, curating a table of diverse thinkers and diverse experiences, and having set quotas. One of the folks that I talked to as I was preparing for this mentioned this great car commercial that's out there right now where a woman goes into a car dealership and says, I want a car with, V6 and this much horsepower, and all of the salespeople ignore her. And then she brings out a puppet of a man and says, hey, I want a V6 car. And everybody swarms her. So I think there is something about representation, seeing a powerful female speaker in a technology group, or seeing a Black man in leadership on your team. I think there's power there in that it helps people see themselves or envision other opportunities. And so I think that in terms of nurturing allies, one thing I try to do is try to seek out perspectives. And that could be organizational. I always want to have a friend in the legal department or in the budget department or in the procurement department. But it could also be, I don't know how this policy shows up for a working mom. Wendy, can you tell me about your experience here? Because I'm not a mom and you have 7 kids. So being to work at this location at this time shows up differently for you. So let's talk about that. And so I think that, one other place that I've found great, a great gift and is feedback. So I've had my terminology corrected a couple times. I used the term brown bag lunch a couple of years ago. Let's have a brown bag lunch and talk about this. And somebody pulled me aside afterwards and said, sometimes that's a derogatory term for Black women, brown bag. And I had no idea. And so now I use lunch and learn, or will, now that we're starting to reemerge from hiding a little bit. But it was an opportunity also to cultivate that person to say, okay, well, tell me more about that. And tell me how you learned that and what's that experience like. So they're even being corrected is a great opportunity to cultivate an ally.
I think, Elise, you bring up a really good point, which is oftentimes with allyship, in my experience as a peer, what's critical is that you can create space for education. And I think there's many things that just because we are an accumulation of our experiences and how we were raised, they're just things that feel natural to us and the intent is not negative, but our societies have evolved, right? Coming from a different perspective, there's evolution. So just when I look at developing or nurturing allyship, I think first of all, being able to have an open framework where people can share and bring things to the leader's attention, but not even if you have a leader that may not be creating that space, it's so much easier for a peer to say something and create space than it is oftentimes for individuals themselves. So, that's the one thing I would encourage. If you see somebody, it's really important, right, to try it, or if you sense something in a meeting, ask the question, right? Not necessarily in the group, but try and make sure their voice is heard or that there is sensitivity to their perspective. Because I do think most people intentionally don't try to harm. They just literally are not aware.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Sasha. I mean, let's go back 5 years, right? 5 years ago, there was not awareness like there is today. And that is the building block upon which everything rests, is awareness. Because with my mentality of not assuming people are negative or trying to be hurtful, it's all about just bringing up the subject so that people understand and know about it. And that way they can be more careful. Because I think that even in my own, the words that I use and the phrases that I use, and even mannerisms that I use sometimes, definitely not trying to be offensive to folks. And I didn't know that there are some things that are offensive. And so being able to have the skill to bring up these things without being overly, pushy or overly judgmental as you're bringing up that feedback is a skill that all of us kind of need to maintain and be able to just, it's about tact. It's about the way you bring things up.
Yeah. And assuming courage, that people,
right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right.
That's all right. Assuming people are not trying to be harmful, right? Like I've never had anyone when I said, hey, you might not want to have that poster up. I mean, it was scary. I had to say it, but at the end of the day, right, I put that thought aside and said, hey, right, as your friend and somebody's in your co-space, like there's things that are appropriate at work and there's things that could basically bring reactions that I don't think you're looking to instill. So, at the end of the day, I do encourage, like you're saying, Elise, have the courage to say something, have the courage to create space in those meetings for your peers, be the voice for your peers. If you don't have a leader that is creating the space for them. So we're running out of a little bit of runway, but I do want to acknowledge Alexa's question because I thought it was kind of tongue in cheek, and I'm not sure if you saw it, Elise, but she basically said, how do you create the virtual M&M jar?
I think that's an awesome product idea. We're actually hosting Jeff and I host office hours to just like, hey, come and chat and we'll have a topic and tag it around the room where we really are. I love to get anybody's thoughts on those kind of casual engagements and the virtual M&M jar. How do you do that in the COVID world? I don't know, but I've seen Teams channels. I've seen those kind of, virtual water coolers. I don't know. I haven't, so far it doesn't equal chocolate.
If anybody else on this call has a great idea related to this, please feel free to either speak up or put it in the chat. I think we're all looking for those ways to casually, right, and informally connect.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, we're getting close to our end time here, and I haven't seen a lot of questions. So please, put your hand up in the chat if you're interested in asking a question this panel. Otherwise, I would love for you ladies, Lisa, if you want to start us off, where would you recommend someone to start who's looking to develop allyship as part of their team or their company culture, right? We all have different spheres of influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great one. And I think that it's a great segue from the last discussion about none of us are experts at this. There's a recognizing that this needs to happen and sort of having the courage to stumble into the first step and kind of try to create that the safety or the accessibility to have these conversations. So in my organization, for instance, we have some training where we talk about trust, not so much as this nebulous, when you see it concept, but here are some ways to behavioralize it. You say and you keep your word. You're transparent, or even when you can't be, you're transparent about the reasons you can't be. We have some training around biases that again tries to take those concepts and make them actionable, but it also tries to normalize that it's okay to have a conversation about bias or about mental health or about racism in the workplace, whereas maybe it didn't feel okay to do that a few years ago. And that I've said the wrong thing. We probably are going to do that, and taking that feedback gracefully, sometimes publicly, I think models that it's okay, and hopefully starts to inculcate that kind of psychological safety culture of making allyship or approachability okay. It also takes time and curiosity. So approaching something with a spirit of curiosity as opposed to, well, that's not my intent, you read that wrong, or this is what I would want in this kind of an organization or in this kind of a situation, but I'm more of an extrovert. Maybe you're more of an introvert. So if I say, Wendy, I haven't heard from you, speak up, you might find that terrifying. I would appreciate that. So having the curiosity to approach somebody and say, I saw this, it felt kind of ooky to me. Can we talk about that? Can I help you? And taking the time to do that meaningfully. It all takes energy, but it's worth it, I think.
Thank you. How about you, Wendy?
I feel like having the ability these days to create like employee resource groups, we call them ERGs at Okta, that are inclusive environments. I started one with a coworker of mine called Women in Solutions Engineering. And obviously we didn't just invite the women to this group, right? So we have semi-monthly meetings and we talk about things that are important to us, and we have men come in as presenters as well. And we take a variety of topics, but mostly are surrounding successful women in our industry and having them tell their stories. How did they get where they are? What type of obstacles did they see? And why did they choose to, do one thing or another in their career? I think is extremely valuable, just to be able to bounce ideas off of each other, to call out a specific situation and talk through how you could have handled that better. That's really what we focus on in our meetings that we've had, is a lot about, okay, this happened to me, this is how I dealt with it. And then we'll almost have the other people in the group come back and say, well, I would have suggested maybe doing this in a different way, which could have ended up in a better outcome. So definitely establish those employee resource groups and invite the entire company to them. Obviously, if they're not interested, they're not going to show up, but the people that show up are inevitably going to have great ideas. So that's definitely one thing. And it's not just women, right? It could be people who are interested in dogs and cats. Like, any excuse you have to get together and learn more about humanity is really what it's all about, to be able to understand how to be inclusive and welcoming. And what's come out of that for us is that we've really identified some women at my company whose skills were underutilized. So having them show up to those meetings and having them maybe present on a technical topic that they became very much a subject matter expert on has now advanced their careers to the point where, all the folks in my role at my company now go to Jenny and say, how would I handle this particular technology question, for instance? And it's also gone beyond just becoming a subject matter expert in a specific technology, but becoming a subject matter expert in how to deal with certain types of situations, such as conflict resolution. How do you deal with things when you feel like you are being, pigeonholed and your skills are not being allowed to come out? Those discussions really lead to actually solving the problems, rather than, just telling your best friend, well, people are treating me bad. Just flip that on its side and say, okay, how can we fix this? And just having a bunch of people contribute ideas to that is super valuable.
That is a great thing that anybody can do also, right? We have all these mechanisms for communication, Slack, right? Not my favorite tool, but I think we're all using it.
1 million channels and you never know which one to go to.
All right, but but if you think about it, we've been given these great technologies to create this broader communication, and that is such a great way that a peer, right, or somebody outside of your team can actually help elevate the talent, and it really serves the organization. So I love that idea, Wendy. So we're down to 3 minutes. I don't believe we have any other questions in the chat. Is there a question out there that anyone would like to ask the panel? This is a great time to exhibit courage. There's only 23 of us. By the way, this committee would love to hear your feedback for anyone that's attending on how we get questions from the audience, because that is one area that we are struggling with, and we certainly would love to incorporate you more into everyone who attends into the program. So really quick on that note, in our commitment to try and finish on time, first of all, thank you, ladies, Wendy and Elise, you were wonderful. Really appreciate you taking the time to prepare for this, share your stories, and have the courage to share your perspectives. I think that's really important that gets acknowledged. For everyone on the call, we do have this lunch series is held on the 3rd Wednesday of every month. Our next one, we're going to try something different because this committee is trying to actually get audience engagement. So we're going to take some interesting topics, have a set of panelists, and we're going to poll the audience to see what you want to talk about. A real popular one is always about money. So we're going to make sure that one is featured, but what we'll do is we'll ask 3 or 4 questions related to a topic, take a quick poll, and then ask our panelists to field those questions. Also, we have, and that will be April 20th, we have our monthly meetings for the STEM chapter, which anyone here is invited to be a guest. The next one is April 13th, and then our May 18th event will be based on mentorship. So again, all of us are accessible through the STEM website. We are happy to connect you with anybody that you are interested in connecting with. And if you have topics for us, you will be receiving a survey shortly. Please, any topics you would like us to go find some speakers for, we would be very grateful if you would put those into the appropriate content cell on the survey when it comes out. So on that note, we're going to go and close the call. Thank you, ladies. Have a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing you in a month. Take care.
Take care, everyone. Thanks so much.